Leora, stop acting like this room belongs to you. Damien Vale, 39-year-old husband of Leora Vale and newly appointed managing director of Dunmore Capital Group's Metropolitan Portfolio, said it with a smile. Not a cruel smile, something worse, a patient one. The kind of smile a man wears when he believes he has already won. Around them, the Vantage Grand Ballroom held 300 guests, institutional investors, city council liaisons, development partners, real estate journalists, and the entire senior leadership of Dunmore Capital Group. Crystal chandeliers threw pale gold light across a room dressed in navy and ivory. At the center of the stage, the Dunmore crest, a compass rose over an arched gateway, caught the light from a dozen directions at once. Leora Emmeline Vale, 34-year-old wife of Damien and the hidden controlling owner of Dunmore Capital Group through the Dunmore Legacy Trust, stood in a pale ivory dress beside a column near the back of the room. In her hand she held a small clutch, and inside that clutch, in a slender velvet sleeve, rested the fountain pen her late grandfather had used to sign the company's first major land deed 41 years ago. She had brought it for the Heritage Room exhibit downstairs, where the company's founding documents were on display. She had not expected Damien to reach for her bag when she turned to speak with the exhibit coordinator. She had not expected him to smile the way he did when he pulled the sleeve out and said, "I'll hold this." She had not expected him to take the stage without warning. But he had done all three. Now Damien stood at the podium beneath the Dunmore crest, holding her grandfather's pen between his thumb and two fingers, turning it slowly in the light, as if it were a prop he had purchased himself. Beside the stage stood Lucinda Payne, 36, the polished founder of Payne Meridian Realty, and the woman whose name Leora had started seeing in places it had no reason to appear. In calendar invites she was not supposed to open, in a dinner charge from a restaurant she had not been, in a faint trace of amber perfume on a collar she had washed herself. Damien's voice carried across the ballroom without effort. "My grandfather-in-law used to say that property is memory, that every building you raise is a promise you make to a city." He paused. "I believe that, and I believe that Dunmore Capital's next chapter requires someone standing beside it who understands not just what was built, but what comes next." Then he stepped down from the podium and walked toward Lucinda. Leora's breath stopped. "This pen signed Dunmore's first deed," Damien said. "It belongs in the hand of someone who understands the future I'm building." He placed the pen into Lucinda's open palm. Cameras clicked. Someone at a front table began to applaud. Stratton Vale, 64, Damien's father and Dunmore Capital's head of legacy operations, lifted his champagne glass in a slow approving arc. Piper Vale, 30, Damien's younger sister and the Vale family's sharpest social blade, smiled from the second row with the satisfied expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment. Leora did not move. She did not scream. She did not walk forward and pull the pen from Lucinda's hand the way every nerve in her body was asking her to. She stood still and felt the room tilt. That pen had rested in her grandfather's breast pocket on the morning he signed the lease for his first property, a 6-story walk-up in the Millwood district that the city had condemned twice, and he had rebuilt from the concrete up. Emmett Dunmore had not come from money. He had come from a family of carpenters who understood that a structure, treated with honesty, would outlast the people who built it. He had started with one building. He had finished with 47. By the time Leora was 12 years old, and standing beside him on a rooftop in the December cold, Dunmore Capital Group held the largest community and core development portfolio in the region, valued at $800 million. And Emmett had left every controlling share of it to his granddaughter. Not to her uncle, who had arrived at the estate reading with 3 attorneys. Not to her mother's second husband, who had asked politely and then less politely about a buyout arrangement. Not to the board members who had worked alongside him for decades, though he had left them generous provisions. He had left the controlling authority to Leora, wrapped inside a legal structure, the Dunmore Legacy Trust, so carefully constructed that even Dunmore Capital's own operations staff had never confirmed who the beneficiary was. The board knew, the attorneys knew, a handful of loyal officers knew. Damien did not know. He had met Leora 3 years after Emmett's death, at a company event, where she had been standing quietly near the catering table in a dress she'd bought on clearance because she didn't want to look like money. She had wanted to know what he would see when he looked at her. She had wanted to know if what he built toward her would be real, or if it would just be architecture. Something that looked solid from the outside and hollow when you stepped through the door. She had her answer now. Damien looked at her across the ballroom. "Leora," he said, with the gentle, faintly embarrassed tone of a man correcting a child in public, You don't need to look so serious. This is a celebration. The ballroom was completely silent. Lucinda's fingers closed around the pen. And Leora thought about her grandfather on that December rooftop, the cold coming up through the soles of her boots, his voice low and certain against the wind. People will try to measure you by what they think you own, Leora. Never let them choose the measure. She looked at Damien for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "You have no idea what you just put in her hand." She turned and walked out, not in tears, not in rage, only in the quiet of a woman who has realized, in the space of a few seconds, that the man she had protected for 6 years was never going to become the man she had hoped he was. The morning before the gala had been cold and grey, the kind of grey that made the Millwood district look like a photograph from another decade. Leora had arrived at the Forsyth building before 7. It was the first property Emmett Dunmore had ever owned, still standing at the corner of Clement and Ash, still occupied, still carrying the original hand-laid brick facade. Her grandfather had refused to resurface because, he said, the texture of old brick told the truth about a building's life. The current residents were a mix of long-term tenants and newer families, the kind of building that held 30 years of neighbor relationships in its stairwells. She came every year on the third Tuesday of November, the date her grandfather had signed the original lease. She came to walk the hallways, check the maintenance logs, and stand for a moment in the lobby where Emmett's signature was framed inside a simple case near the door. No one on the operations side knew she was coming. She didn't announce it. She signed in as she always did, with her full legal name. Harlan Voss, 61, the building superintendent who had served at the Forsyth for 22 years and who had begun his career at Dunmore Capital under Emmett himself, was rolling a paint cart across the lobby when he looked up and went completely still. He looked at her face, then at the sign-in sheet. Then he said very quietly, "Miss Dunmore." His voice had the quality of a man who had not said that name aloud in years and was not certain he was allowed to. Leora looked at him. "Mr. Voss." He didn't say anything else right away. He straightened slowly, let go of the cart handle, and removed his cap. "He used to say you'd walk in here one day and just take the inventory log from me without making any fuss about it." Leora felt something shift behind her sternum. "He told me the same thing about you, that when I did you'd already have it sorted." Harlan looked at his clipboard. Boilers been serviced, new seals on the third-floor windows, 2 tenants on the waiting list for the corner unit. He held it out to her, sorted. Leora took it. They stood quietly in the lobby for a moment. The old building settled around them the way old buildings do. A creak in the joists, a hiss from the radiator, a draft through the mail slot. Leora ran her thumb along the edge of the clipboard and thought about her grandfather and how much of what he had built was still here, still standing, still useful. She thought about the pen in her clutch, and the gala that evening, and the speech Damien had been rehearsing in fragments all week, and the way he had said that morning, casually and with perfect confidence, "Just smile tonight, and let me do the talking." She had smiled. She had not promised the rest. Whitby Ashmore, 49, Dunmore Capital's internal audit director, and one of the 3 officers who had long known the full scope of Leora's controlling authority, was waiting near the service entrance when she came back outside. He had a folder under his arm, and his expression carried the particular flatness of a man who had been sitting with bad news for too long. "How bad?" Leora said, not a question. Vance Payne's firm submitted 3 accelerated zoning consultations through Stratton's department. All 3 bypassed the standard disclosure review. They're marked as courtesy referrals. He opened the folder. "They're not courtesies. They're Dunmore projects that Vance is now embedded in without any formal contract." Vance Payne, 40, Lucinda's older brother and the founder of Payne Development Partners. His company had been appearing at the edges of Dunmore Capital's pipeline for months without a clear explanation. Damien coordinated the introductions. Email trail confirms it. 3 months of contact. Stratton signed the departmental approvals. I flagged the pattern 6 weeks ago, but the authorization chain buried it. Leora closed the folder. The grey morning pressed down on the Millwood district. A delivery truck rolled past. Somewhere above them, a window opened, and a woman called down to a child on the sidewalk below. "Tonight," Leora said, "we watch carefully." Whitby adjusted the folder under his arm. "And if they push past the line?" Leora looked back at the Forsyth building, at the old brick, at the framed signature visible through the lobby glass. "Then I stop being quiet about who owns it." She cried for 60 seconds in the back of the car. 1 minute, no more. She sat forward with one hand pressed over her mouth and let the sound out, small, controlled and real. She cried for the version of Damien she had stayed up imagining into existence for too long. She cried for every dinner where she had translated his arrogance into ambition for the sake of her own peace. She cried for the pen which had been in her family longer than her marriage had existed, and which was now sitting in Lucinda Payne's palm like a trophy that cost nothing. Then she lifted her head, wiped her face once with the back of her hand, and called Orenda Chalk. Orenda Chalk, 50, legal counsel for the Dunmore Legacy Trust, answered before the second ring. "I'm ready," Orenda said. No greeting, no question. She had been ready for 3 years. "Emergency board session," Leora said, 7 a.m. "Notice goes out within the hour. Quorum language is already prepared."
Agenda.
Leora looked out the rain-streaked window. Lucinda was still visible through the ballroom's glass facade, the pen now hanging from her fingers like an afterthought. Ownership activation, fiduciary misconduct, unauthorized third-party access, contract freeze, evidence preservation. A pause, and the divorce. Leora said nothing for a moment. 6 years. She had taken his last name in public and kept her grandfather's in trust, and she had told herself for 6 years that this was practical, not sad, that she was protecting the company, that the man she had married and the man the company needed to see were two separate problems she was managing in parallel. She had been managing him. She had confused that for love for a long time. "Prepare it," she said. The car pulled away from the curb. Leora did not go home. She went to the Dunmore archive room, 3 floors below street level, beneath the company's original headquarters on Ash Street, where the walls held the smell of cedar and paper and the particular cool of a building that had stood through 4 decades of seasons. She went in alone, and she sat at the table where her grandfather had once spread out his first city maps, and she read his letter again. The one sealed in the cedar box, the envelope marked in his handwriting. "When they mistake your patience for permission." His words were clear and unhurried, the way he spoke. "Do not use what I left you for pride or for punishment. Use it to protect what we built for the people who depend on it. The moment the company needs protecting more than the peace does, that is your moment." She put the letter down. She picked up the authorization documents Orenda had sent to her phone. She signed them with her full legal name. Leora Emmeline Dunmore. Then she drove home, slept 4 hours, and came back before dawn. The lobby screens changed at 6:58. One moment they showed gala highlights, a silver rendering of the Dunmore crest, Stratton at the podium, Damien shaking investors' hands, the city skyline reflected in raised champagne. Next moment every screen went black, then white text appeared across the entire building. "Emergency board session, controlling shareholder present." The lobby froze. A security officer near the front desk looked at his radio. A receptionist set down her coffee slowly, as if sudden movement might break something. 2 junior associates stopped mid-sentence in the atrium and stared. Damien had arrived 7 minutes earlier, wearing the same watch he wore to the gala, with the particular ease of a man who believed the morning was going to be a formality. He had expected Leora to call him the night before. Apologetic, unsettled, asking to come home. She had not called. He had told himself she was being dramatic. He had told himself that over coffee, and told himself again in the elevator. He stood now near the front desk, reading the lobby screens, and the ease in his posture began to come apart 1 degree at a time. Lucinda arrived 6 minutes after him, without the pen. She had left it on her nightstand, no longer sure what it was. Stratton came in behind them, his jaw set, his eyes moving around the room with the calculation of a man already composing a story. Piper was beside him, her overnight confidence replaced by something smaller and less certain. Vance stood near the revolving doors and checked his phone with the tight expression of a man whose messages had stopped being answered. Then the private elevator at the far end of the lobby chimed. The doors opened. Orenda Chalk stepped out first, carrying a legal case. Whitby came behind her, audit folders pressed flat against his chest. Fenwick Adler, 58, Dunmore Capital's board secretary, followed with the session packet, and then Leora stepped out. She wore a dark charcoal suit. Her hair was pulled back cleanly. On her lapel was a small brass pin. A compass rose over an arched gateway, the original Dunmore crest from her grandfather's first business card, which had lived in the cedar chest until the day he died. The older employees saw it first. Harlan Voss, who had driven in from Millwood that morning without being asked, stood near the security desk with his cap in his hands. He had seen that pin before, in a photograph on the Forsyth lobby wall, in a box on Emmett Dunmore's desk, in a picture from years before Harlan had even started working there. He straightened. An office manager near the elevators rose from her chair without speaking. Two board members who had been waiting near the coffee station stood. Then a third, then others, slowly and quietly, the way a room rises for something it has been expecting longer than it knew. Damien stared at the people standing and could not understand what he was looking at. "Leora," he said, his voice had not found its register yet. "What is this?" Leora walked forward without adjusting her pace. Arenda spoke beside her. "Mrs. Dunmore is expected in the boardroom." The name moved through the lobby the way a stone moves through still water. Dunmore. Damien's mouth formed a word and did not complete it. Stratton went very still. For a moment he looked the way men look when a door they thought was decorative turns out to have always been load-bearing. The realization arrived in pieces. Each piece was worse than the last. "She's my wife," Damien said, not with authority, with desperation. Arenda looked at him with the patience of someone who had been anticipating this exact sentence for years. "She is also Leora Emmeline Dunmore, controlling beneficiary of the Dunmore Legacy Trust and majority owner of Dunmore Capital Group." The lobby did not move. Leora stopped in front of Damien. She looked at him the way you look at something you built toward for a long time and then understood. Finally, you had been building alone. "You put my grandfather's pen in another woman's hand," she said, "inside his company, in front of his investors." She held his gaze without anger, without performance, only with the clean and devastating accuracy of someone who is no longer protecting anything. "I gave you every opportunity to be the man I believed you were. You chose who you are instead." She walked past him. "Leora," his voice cracked, "I didn't know." She did not stop. "I know you didn't. That was the point." The boardroom session lasted 3 hours. Whitby presented the audit findings without pause. Vance Payne's 3 unauthorized project embeds, the departmental approvals Stratton had signed without disclosure, the coordinated introduction emails from Damien's company account, and the expense lines Lucinda's firm had run through Dunmore Capital's client cultivation budget across 4 months. Stratton called it normal operations. The board member beside him asked him to define normal. He did not answer. One by one, the records appeared on the screen. Every approval Stratton had signed, every email Damien had sent on Vance's behalf, every event expense Lucinda's firm had logged against Dunmore Capital's accounts, each document landing on the table quietly, without theatrics. Just evidence doing what evidence does when there is enough of it. When Lucinda finally entered the room, she no longer looked like the woman from the night before. Without the gala armor, the heels, the jewelry, the practiced composure, she looked like someone who had borrowed a roll and was being asked to return it. "I didn't know the pen was," she started. "You knew it wasn't yours," Leora said, not unkindly, exactly. Lucinda looked at the table. Damien sat at the far end and said very little. He watched Leora conduct the session the way you watch someone move through a room they were born knowing, not with surprise, but with the slow and sickening recognition that every moment of your confidence had been built on a foundation you never once looked at. At 9:45, Leora read the resolutions. Stratton Vale, suspended from all duties as head of legacy operations, pending full investigation into unauthorized third-party facilitation, disclosure violations, and misuse of departmental approval authority. The color left his face by the second clause. Damien Vale's managing director appointment, all executive sponsorship, access credentials, and operational authority within Dunmore Capital Group revoked immediately, pending legal review. Damien looked up. Marisol Fenn, 62, the independent board chair who had served Dunmore Capital since Emmett's final year, looked at him over her glasses with the expression of a woman who had expected this day would come. "She can," Marisol said simply. "And she's correct." Piper Vale, removed from all event coordination roles, guest privileges, and investor relations access. Vance Payne and Payne Development Partners, barred from all Dunmore Capital projects and facilities, pending legal determination of unauthorized access and conflict of interest. Each consequence landed cleanly. No raised voices, no spectacle. Just resolution doing what it was supposed to do, closing what had been left open too long. At the end, Damien looked at Leora from across the long table. The managing director ease was completely gone. What remained was something quieter and more honest than anything he had shown her in years. "Did you ever love me?" he asked. His voice was low enough that only the people closest to them could hear it. Leora was quiet for a moment. "I loved who I kept trying to make you into," she said. "I spent so long building toward the version of you I believed in that I stopped checking whether you were building anything back." She looked at him steadily. "That is not love. That is architecture. And I am done designing for someone who does not respect the foundation." She set the divorce filing in front of him and walked to the door. 3 weeks later, the pen came home. A conservator had cleaned it, carefully, only the exterior, and a small display case had been prepared in the heritage room beside the framed original deed. Leora had written the placard herself, in the plain language her grandfather would have used. The founding pen of Emmett Dunmore, used to sign the first property agreement of Dunmore Capital Group, November 1983, returned to company history by Leora Emmeline Dunmore. She stood in front of the case for a long time after it was sealed. Harlan Voss came in without knocking, the way people who have worked somewhere long enough sometimes do. He stood beside her and looked at the pen through the glass. He would have been glad it's back, Harlan said. It never should have left. No, he was quiet a moment, but it came back because of you, not because someone handed it to you, because you took it. Leora looked at the pen, at the deed beside it, at the compass rose crest mounted above the case, the same one she had worn on her lapel that morning in the lobby, the same one that had made a room full of people stand up without being asked. She thought about her grandfather on the Forsyth rooftop, in December, the cold coming through her coat, his voice certain against the wind. She thought about the 6 years she had spent making herself smaller so a man could feel tall in rooms that had always belonged to her family. She thought about Harlan saying her grandfather's name quietly across a sign-in sheet in the early morning grey, and about the way the lobby had gone still before she said a single word, because something in that building had always known who she was, even when she had stopped saying it out loud. He told me, she said, that every building tells the truth about the people who built it. Treat it honestly, and it holds. Don't, and it finds the crack. Harlan nodded once. Outside, through the heritage room window, the city moved in the November morning. Cranes over construction sites, scaffolding against old facades, the ordinary and persistent work of building things meant to last. Dunmore Capital's portfolio was intact. The trust was intact. And for the first time in 6 years, so was Leora. She was not Mrs. Vale today. She was not the quiet woman at the gala table who was told to smile and not speak too much. She was the woman who had taken the chair no one had offered her, in the boardroom of the company her grandfather built from one building and one improbable belief, and she had held it with the same steadiness he had always told her she carried, whether she was showing it or not. The pen rested behind the glass, small and gold and patient. Emmett Dunmore's first mark on the city. And now, Leora's.